My name is Myra. I am 30 years old. And for most of my life, I thought I knew what my role in my family was. I thought I was the extra piece, the one who didn't quite fit, the one who had to work hard, be quiet, and be thankful to get a seat at the table. I thought that was the way things were. I didn't know that everything I thought was true was a lie. And I had no idea that my 30th birthday would be the night that light blew up in front of 40 people, in a 5-star restaurant, under crystal chandeliers. I went to my birthday dinner 2 weeks ago expecting nothing more than polite smiles and forced fun. I learned the truth about who I was, where I came from, and why the woman who raised me made me feel like I didn't belong for 30 years. My family didn't know that I had been holding onto an envelope that my grandmother had left behind. Inside was something so strong that it could break every version of the story they had ever told. You need to go back to an ordinary Thursday night a month earlier to understand what happened that night. That night changed everything without anyone knowing it. It was almost 8 o'clock, and I was still at my desk at Harrison & Cole Architecture, going over blueprints for a renovation project that suddenly seemed useless. There wasn't much light in the office. Most people had left for home hours ago. I was tired, my back hurt, and all I wanted to do was turn off my computer and hide in my small apartment. Then my phone rang. Number not known. Area code for Boston. I looked at the screen and thought about whether or not to ignore it. Most of the time, calls from unknown numbers were spam, robocalls, or people trying to sell me something I didn't need. But this call felt different in some way. I don't know how to explain it. I replied. Miss Anderson. The voice was calm, professional, and male. Yes. My name is Theodore Whitman. I was the lawyer for your grandmother. I sat up straight in my chair so quickly that it scared me. 6 months before, my grandmother Grace had died. The funeral had already happened. They had read the will. It was supposed to be all done. I don't understand, I said. My grandmother's estate was already taken care of. There's something else, he said. Something your grandmother left just for you. She told me to talk to you in person. My heart started to race. Grandma Grace was always unique. She was the only person in my family who made me feel like I belonged. When my mom made quiet comments at family dinners that were meant to hurt me, Grandma would squeeze my hand under the table. She whispered something to me that I will never forget when I was crying alone in her garden. Sweetheart, you belong here more than you know. You'll get it one day. I never got it. Not until now. When can we get together? I asked. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. I'll send you a text with the address. I sat in the dark office for a long time after I hung up, staring at nothing. Things that are secret. Grandma Grace had secrets that she only told me. And for some reason, I knew those secrets would make things different. That night, I went back to my apartment. A small, cramped one-bedroom that I rented by myself because I had never been able to live with family. I threw my keys on the counter, took off my shoes, and fell onto the couch. Again, my phone buzzed. The chat for the whole family. My mom, Patricia Anderson, had sent a message. Big news. We are having a dinner for Myra's 30th birthday at the Sterling. 7 p.m. on Saturday the 15th, everyone is welcome. I read the message 3 times. The Sterling was one of the priciest places to eat in Boston. My parents had never thrown me anything like that in 30 years. For my 18th birthday, I got a cake from the grocery store and a card that only said, Happy Birthday. That same year, my sister Jenna had a pool party with a DJ, a photographer, and 30 friends. I stared at the message, and my stomach started to hurt. Why now? Why something so big and public? A small, hopeful voice said, maybe this is her trying. This could be different. I said, wow, thanks a lot. I'm very surprised. The answer came right away. You deserve it, my love. Darling. She had never called me that before. The next morning, I sat across from Theodore Whitman in an office that smelled like leather and old money. He put a big cream-colored envelope on the desk between us. It was sealed with wax and had my grandmother's initials on it. He said, she made this 5 years ago. She was very clear. You were the only one who was supposed to get this. And only after she died. I touched the envelope with my fingers. It was heavy. Not physically, but emotionally. There was a copy of her will, a handwritten letter, and a smaller envelope that was sealed inside. He said quietly, she told you not to open the smaller one unless you had to. She thought you would know when the time was right. I didn't open it then. I read her letter alone in my apartment that night. It was like her voice coming through time when I read her writing. She said she loved me. She said she was sorry for not keeping me safe. Then she wrote the words that changed everything for me. You are my blood. My real blood. That night, I locked up the smaller envelope. My hands were shaking. Deep down, I knew I would need it. I just didn't know when it would happen. What I didn't know was that Patricia was making her own plans while I was finding out the truth. And she wanted to use my birthday as the stage. The night after I read my grandmother's letter, I didn't get much sleep. Her words kept playing in my head every time I closed my eyes. You are my family. It seemed impossible, but in some way it made sense of everything I had never been able to say. The space. Patricia looked at me like I was a favor she didn't want to do. Grandma Grace looked at me like I was something very special that she was afraid to lose. The next day, I went to work on autopilot. I answered emails, looked over drawings, and nodded along in meetings, but my mind was elsewhere. The sealed envelope was locked in my safe at home, and it was burning a hole in my thoughts. Theodore Whitman's voice kept telling me that the will would be made public in 2 weeks. 2 weeks before everything blew up. I got another message from the family group chat that night. Patricia was in full planning mode. Arrangements for seating. Suggestions for what to wear. A reminder to look nice because there will be important people there. That last part stuck with me. People who matter. She didn't want to celebrate me, she just wanted people to see it. I should have been happy. A restaurant with 5 stars. There are 40 guests. Finally, a real birthday party. Instead, a quiet fear settled in my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about Grandma Grace's warning. Get ready for what your family might do when they find out. They already knew about the will. I didn't know how, but later I found out that Patricia had friends all over the place, even people who heard things they shouldn't have. She always did. She was very good at control. I did something I don't usually let myself do a week before the party. I went shopping for myself because I wanted to feel good, not because I needed something or something old had worn out. I walked into Nordstrom and lingered longer than usual, touching fabrics, letting myself imagine what it might feel like to walk into that room without shrinking. When I heard a voice I knew behind me, I was holding up a deep emerald dress in front of the mirror. That one. I turned around and laughed, even though I didn't want to. Lucas Smith, my best friend at work, stood there with his hands in his pockets and a smile on his face like he had just caught me doing something wrong. You following me now? Why? I asked. He said, I saw you through the window. You looked like you were making a deal with yourself. That was very painful. Afterward, we got coffee, and for the first time, I told someone what had been going on. Not all of it. Not the part with the blood. But that's enough. The lawyer. The will. The party that suddenly seemed less like a celebration and more like a trap. Lucas didn't say anything while he listened. When I was done, he leaned back and looked at me for a long time. Finally, he said, "Myra, you've walked into that family's traps your whole life." I frowned. "That's not fair." "It is," he said softly. "And if there's even a chance this party is another one, you shouldn't go in with nothing." I understood exactly what he meant. I put everything out on my bed that night. The will. The letter from Grandma Grace. And the envelope that was closed. For a long time, I looked at it. I tried out my small clutch for the party, even though it was only big enough for my phone and lipstick. The envelope fit perfectly. I told myself, just in case. The day of the party came too soon. I took my time getting dressed. The emerald dress fit me so well that it made me look taller. I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She looked calm. Set. The sterling was amazing. Chandeliers made of crystal. Windows that go from floor to ceiling and look out over the city. A long U-shaped table with white linen on it and a chair in the middle wrapped in ribbon. My chair. There were already 40 people there. People in my family that I hardly knew. Friends of my parents who had seen me grow up but never really seen me. Patricia's co-workers had pushed me to invite her to make it special. Patricia rushed over to me with her arms wide open and a smile on her face. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, hugging me tightly. My dad was behind her. "Rich?" Instead of hugging me, he shook my hand. His eyes almost immediately slid away. He muttered, "Happy birthday." Jenna didn't even bother with that. She stood to the side with her phone already raised, recording. Then I saw Aunt Helen. She walked across the room and gave me a real hug that made me feel warm and grounded. When she pulled away, she whispered something that made my heart race. "Remember that your grandmother would be proud of you no matter what happens tonight." A server told us it was time to sit down before I could ask what she meant. I sat down in the chair with the ribbon around it and put my clutch against my thigh. The envelope inside felt like a pulse. Dinner went by in a flash. A polite talk. Laughter that was forced. I almost let myself relax. Patricia then got up. She walked up to the podium, smoothed out her dress, and tapped the mic. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice warm and practiced. "We are celebrating someone very special tonight. Myra is 30 years old." The room was full of applause. I smiled tightly. 30 years, Patricia went on. "It seems like she just came into our lives." Something shifted in her tone. Not obvious. Sharp. "I've been thinking a lot about Myra's trip. About her past. About everything this family has done for her." My stomach fell. "We've been there for her through school, work, and everything else," she said, her smile getting bigger. "We've loved her like she was one of us." Like. The room suddenly seemed smaller. "But I think," she said, letting the silence last for a moment, "it's time for us to be honest." The guests murmured. Patricia said, "We've kept a secret for 30 years. But secrets have a way of getting out. And Myra deserves the truth on her special day." I was stuck. I couldn't get any air. She said, "Myra isn't our biological daughter." Gasped. Whispers. I saw 40 pairs of eyes turn to me. "She's adopted," Patricia said, and her voice sounded disturbingly like victory. "We took her in when she was 2. And do you know why?" My ears hurt. Tax benefits, she said with a laugh. The government had a great program back then. We thought, why not? Jenna started to laugh out loud. My dad looked at his plate. Patricia said, Myra was never really part of this family. She was a money choice. The silence that came after was unbearable. She was waiting for me to break down. To weep. To run. I stood instead. My legs shook, but my voice didn't. I said calmly, thank you, Patricia. For being honest at last. Her smile faded. I agreed and reached into my clutch. It's time for the truth. I took the envelope out. The room was completely quiet. And for the first time that night, Patricia's face showed fear. The room held its breath as I got up from my chair. 40 people, frozen in the middle of their thoughts and judgments. Patricia's grip on the edge of the podium got tighter, and her knuckles turned white just enough to show that she was nervous. She didn't think there would be any resistance. She thought it would fall apart. I held up the envelope so everyone could see it and said, this is a letter from my grandmother. A wave went through the room. People still respected Grandma Grace's name. Patricia couldn't even get rid of that. I went on, she wrote it not long before she died. And she told me to read it only if I needed to know the truth. Patricia made herself laugh. Myra, dear, this isn't the time for, I said, you had 30 years to decide when. I didn't raise my voice. Silence came back with a bang. I broke the seal. My hands were steady. I was aware of every breath and blink, but fear had turned into something else. Clarity. I'll keep this short, I said, looking around the room once and then looking down at the page. These are her words, not mine. I read slowly and clearly. My dear Myra. If you are reading this, it means that the people who raised you chose to be cruel instead of kind. I want you to know the truth that they never wanted you to know. Patricia's face lost all its color. You weren't adopted just for convenience. You were hidden because you were ashamed. Someone behind me took a deep breath. You are my granddaughter by blood. Eleanor, your mother was my daughter. She was sent away when she became pregnant because the family feared scandal more than they valued honesty. My dad's head shot up. Patricia shook her head hard. This isn't true. I kept on reading. Eleanor died while giving birth to you. The family said they would raise you as their own if they could erase where you came from. Patricia made it clear. She said that love was not necessary, but looks were. People in the room started to murmur. Chairs scraped against each other. A fork fell. Jenna stopped making a recording. Richard stood up so suddenly that his chair fell over. He said in a hoarse voice, Myra, that's not, I haven't finished yet, I said. My voice was heard. I didn't know it could. The inheritance you will get was meant for you since the day you were born. It's not been nice. It is restitution. Patricia hit the podium with her hand. Stop this. She was old and senile. I finally looked at her and said, she was of sound mind. Her lawyer said it was true. More than once. Her mouth opened and closed. For 30 years, I said as I carefully folded the letter, I was told to be thankful. To be quiet. To remember how lucky I was. I put the letter back in the envelope. But I learned something tonight. I wasn't lucky to get in. You were lucky that I stayed. Gasp. Whispers. Someone laughed in a nervous way. Richard looked like the ground had vanished beneath him. You mean your Eleanor's? Yes, I said. Your sister. He fell back into his chair, his hands shaking. Patricia's voice got louder and more shrill. This is crazy. Even if that were true, which it isn't, blood doesn't give you the right to change history. I don't want to change it, I said. I'm fixing it. I reached into my purse again and took out the will. I said, this will be public in 8 days, and I put it down on the table. But since you've chosen to be honest tonight, I thought I'd do the same. I looked at the guests. My grandmother gave me the estate. Everything. The home. The money put in. The trust. A shocked silence. Patricia's lips shook. This family owns that estate. I am this family, I said. Jenna got up. Mom, you said, I said what I had to, Patricia said angrily, then stopped when she realized what she had said. People turned their heads. The decision has been made. I took a deep breath. I didn't plan on doing this tonight. I wanted to leave without making a fuss. Let the paperwork do the talking. I looked Patricia in the eye. But you wanted a show. I pointed to the room. Well done. Someone I hadn't seen leave called security to the edge of the dining hall. The manager of the restaurant was nervous and hovered. I said calmly, I'm going now. Anyone who wants to talk to me politely can do so another day. I looked at Aunt Helen. She was crying, but not out loud. She nodded once, and her tears showed how proud she was. Patricia grabbed my arm as I walked by. You think this gives you power? She hissed. You have no idea what you've just begun. I leaned in and spoke softly so that only she could hear. I've lived inside what you started, I said. This is just the end. I gently took her hand away and walked away. The air in the city felt like freedom when I went outside. I stood there for a moment, letting my hands shake because I didn't need them to be steady anymore. Lucas was waiting by the road. He didn't ask anything. He simply opened his arms. I stepped into them and took a deep breath for the first time in years. Are you okay? He asked softly. I said, looking up at the bright windows above, I think I finally am. Before we even got to the car, my phone buzzed. A lot of messages came in. Numbers I didn't know. Family members who suddenly remembered my name. Sorry. Claims. Threats that look like concern. I turned off the phone. What happens now? Lucas asked. I smiled, even though it was small. Now, I said, they know what it's like to live without control. That night, I didn't see Patricia again. But I could still feel her thereafter. In the rush. In the sudden rush of people who had built their lives on a lie and were seeing it fall apart. The will became public 8 days later. And everything was different. It spread through the news cycle faster than I thought it would. Even though I had turned it off, my phone was vibrating non-stop again by noon the next day. There were a lot of emails. Some were from relatives I barely knew, and others were from lawyers I had never heard of. All of them were suddenly very interested in how I was doing. I didn't pay any attention to them. I stayed home from work and sat by the window with a cup of coffee that got cold in my hands. For 30 years, silence and duty had shaped my life. The silence was gone, and the duty had broken. The quiet was strange, even scary, like being on the edge of a cliff and realizing that the ground behind you is gone. That morning, Lucas stayed with me and pretended to read while really keeping an eye on me. Finally, he said, "You don't have to be strong today." "I don't know how not to be," I said. He nodded, as if he understood it better than I thought he would. On the third day, the pressure began to build. Patricia's lawyer sent a formal request for a meeting. Richard left 3 voicemails, and each one was worse than the last. Jenna put something vague and dramatic about betrayal and greed on the internet, tagging no one and everyone at the same time. And then there was the house. It wasn't just the money that Grandma Grace left me that was valuable. It meant something. I had only been to the old Whitman house a few times as a child. It was on 12 acres just outside the city. Patricia had always told me that it was too much responsibility for me. I remembered it in a different way. The big porch. The floors that creak. The way Grandma Grace's voice got softer there, as if the walls were listening. A week after the party, I drove out there by myself. I remembered that the gates were locked. But now the keys were heavy and real in my purse. Something inside me opened when the gate did. The driveway went on, with trees on either side that had grown taller while I had grown smaller and learned to take up less space. The house looked just like I remembered it. Shutters that are white. Ivy curling up on one side. Still. Waiting. The air inside smelled faintly of lemon polish and thyme. Sheets covering furniture. Sunlight coming in through tall windows. I walked from room to room, and my footsteps echoed softly, as if the house was finally listening to me. I found a box on the desk in the study with Grandma Grace's careful handwriting on it that said my name. There were pictures inside. My mom. Even though I had never met her before, I knew who she was right away. Same eyes. Same mouth. A smile that felt like it belonged to me. There were also letters, each one written in a looping script and addressed to me. She wrote them while she was pregnant, knowing she wouldn't be able to keep me and that she might not live. I cried on the floor until my chest hurt. That night, I slept in the guest room, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled a little bit like lavender. I felt like I was finally connected to something real for the first time in my life. The fight I had been putting off finally happened the next morning. Patricia showed up without warning. I saw her car from the window, and my stomach tightened, but I didn't run. I didn't go into hiding. I walked over to the door and opened it before she could knock. She seemed smaller in some way. Not as polished. Her eyes quickly moved past me and into the house. "You don't have the right to be here," she said without thinking. "I own this place," I said. "You are trespassing." She clenched her jaw. Still, she went inside. We stood in the foyer, 30 years of unspoken anger between us. She didn't look like a woman in charge for the first time. She looked like she had lost the script. "You think you've won," she said in a low voice. "But you don't know what you're up against." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You made your life by taking mine away." She laughed with a lot of anger. "You were a problem." Eleanor didn't care about the consequences. The family needed things to stay the same. "You needed to obey," I said. She got closer and spoke more quietly. "You don't belong here. You haven't ever." I looked her in the eye and didn't flinch. "This house is my mother's. To my grandma. For me. You can't make that choice anymore." There was a dark flicker in her eyes. "You're making enemies," she said. "People who won't let this go." "I've forgiven enough for a lifetime," I said. She looked at me for a long time, then turned and walked away without saying anything else. The next move came quickly. Legal challenges were filed within days. Allegations of undue influence. People are saying bad things about Grandma Grace's mental health. Every paper had Patricia's name on it. Some of them had Richard's signature on them, but it was shaky and unclear. I got my own lawyers. The best. Not because I want to, but because I have to. I didn't want to be unprepared this time. The stress took its toll. Nights were hard to sleep through. My dreams filled with voices arguing behind closed doors, doors I was still trying to open. Lucas checked in on me all the time, which helped me stay grounded when I started to spiral. He kept telling me, "You're not alone." And over time, I began to trust him. I got a letter with no return address on the day the court set the first hearing. There was only one sentence inside, and it was written in a familiar hand. "You should have kept quiet." I didn't let anyone see it. Instead, I put it in the fireplace and watched the words curl up and disappear into smoke. Patricia sat across from me at the hearing, calm again, wearing power and perfume. But now I could see through it. I saw the fear that was there. The judge paid attention. The lawyers talked. There was evidence. Letters from Grandma Grace. Records of medical care. People Patricia hadn't thought to keep quiet gave testimony. At the end of the day, nothing was decided, but things had changed. There were cameras waiting outside the courthouse. Questions flew around. Nothing came out of my mouth. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. That night, I went back to the house and sat on the porch, watching the sky turn dark. For a long time, I thought my worth depended on something. For a short time. Can be taken back. Now, even with the fight far from over, I knew one thing for certain. They could contest the will. They could ask if it's true. They could try to change the story. But they could never erase me again. And that was just the start. The weeks that followed blurred together in a way that made time feel unreliable. Some days went by too quickly, while others seemed to last forever, as if they were trying to make me give up. Every morning I woke up in the old house and felt lost for a second. Then the creaking of the floorboards and the quiet knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be brought me back to reality. The fight in court got worse very quickly. Patricia's team was aggressive and never gave up. Motions were filed late at night. People who hadn't talked to me in years got subpoenas. It wasn't just about the property anymore. It was about punishing me for not going away. Richard tried again to reach out. This time, he came to the gate. I watched him from the porch as he stood there with his hands in his coat pockets and his shoulders hunched like he was getting ready for a storm. I stayed still for a long time. Then I went down the stairs and stopped just short of the fence. I told them, "You can't come in." He quickly nodded. "I know. I had to see you." We were quiet for a long time, and it was uncomfortable. "I didn't know," he finally said. "About Eleanor. About you." Patricia told me it was all set. That it was better like this. I believed her, I said. He flinched. I wanted to. That honesty hurt more than a lie would have. He went on, "She said you were weak. That knowing the truth would break you." I laughed, short and humorless. "So you thought it would be nicer to lie to me for 30 years? He didn't know what to say. He said softly, "I lost my sister. And I lost you, even though you were right there." I looked at him. The man who had taken care of me from afar instead of being mean. With lack of love instead of love. At that moment, I learned something that shocked me. I didn't hate him. But I also didn't need him. "I am sorry for your loss," I said. "Really? But you don't get forgiveness just because you're finally uncomfortable." His eyes got full. "What do you want from me?" I thought about that. About the child I used to be, who needed approval. About the woman I had become. I said, "Nothing. That's the point." I turned around and walked back to the house. He didn't follow. Aunt Helen came to see us not long after. She brought Patricia old albums, papers, and stories that Patricia had buried so deeply that even she might have forgotten them. We spent hours at the kitchen table putting together a picture of my mother that felt real instead of abstract. Helen said softly, "She loved you before you were born. She fought for you." Patricia made it sound like Eleanor didn't care. She wasn't. She was brave. That word sank into me like a seed. Courageous. Things changed at work as well. People treated me differently now. Carefully. Some looked at them with admiration, while others looked at them with barely hidden curiosity. Lucas was the only thing that stayed the same. One night, after a really bad call with my lawyers, I found him in the study, looking at the shelves. "She kept everything," he said, pointing to things in the room. "All of her different selves." "She kept me," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if he was seeing me for the first time. "So what will happen when this is over?" he asked. "What?" I shrugged my shoulders. "I fix things. On my terms." The court hearings went on and on. Patricia's tactics got worse. Tips to tabloids that don't have a name. People talk behind my back about my mental health. They are trying to make me look unstable, opportunistic, and ungrateful. It almost worked. One article hit home more than the others. It made me doubt my mother's existence, as if Grandma Grace had made up the story. It felt like I was being erased again when I read it. That night, I locked myself in my room. The weight of it made it hard for me to breathe. Lucas knocked once and then came in anyway. He said, "You don't have to do this by yourself." "I am tired," I said, "of proving that I have a right to live." He sat next to me and said, "You don't owe them proof. You owe yourself peace." There was something in his voice that cut through the fog. I made a choice the next day. I held a press conference. I told the truth in front of cameras. Not the official version. The one with people. I told them about my mom. About not talking. About how it affects a person to grow up feeling like they have to earn love. I didn't say Patricia's name. I didn't have to. The answer came right away and was too much to handle. Messages from people you don't know. From people who had lived versions of my story in different homes and with different families. The story changed. Patricia couldn't handle it anymore. She was desperate for her next move. She filed an emergency injunction, saying that the house was disputed property and I had no right to stay there. The judge said no within hours. I saw panic slip through her cracks for the first time. It was too quiet in the house that night. I walked through the halls, touching the walls to ground myself in their strength. I stopped in front of Grandma Grace's picture and said, "I'm trying." I got the answer sooner than I thought I would. My lawyer called. Voice tight with excitement. "They want to settle," he said. I shut my eyes. It was clear that Patricia's terms were for her own benefit. She wanted a piece of the estate. No sound. A promise to stop talking in public. I laughed when I read them. I just said, no. I made the counteroffer. Complete control of the estate. A public acknowledgement of my family history. And one last thing. Patricia had to write an apology. Not to me. To my mom. She said no. The case went to court. Testimony peeled away the layers she had hidden behind money and polish. People came forward as witnesses. Former employees. Friends from the past. People she didn't think much of. When the jury came back with a decision, it was clear. The will was still valid. It was my estate. Patricia didn't move as the judge read the decision. I almost felt bad for her for a second. Almost. The air felt lighter outside the courthouse. As if the city had breathed out. Lucas held my hand tightly. "You did it." I said, "No. I made it through." I went back to the house that night and opened all the windows. I let the wind blow through the rooms, taking away the heaviness of the past. I stood in the study with my mother's letters and felt almost at peace. I had no idea what the future would be like. There were still wounds to heal, relationships to rebuild, and a self to fully embrace. But this was the first time I felt like the story ahead was mine. And I was finally ready to write it. The wind didn't feel like fireworks. There was no sudden rush of happiness or big release. It was quiet. A lot. It felt like putting down a heavy weight that I had been carrying for so long that my hands didn't know what to do without it. I woke up before dawn the day after the verdict. The house was quiet, caught in that time between night and day when neither has fully arrived. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular, waiting for the panic to hit. It didn't. Instead, there was an emptiness that felt almost respectful. A place where fear used to be. Lucas came down a little later, with messy hair and soft eyes. At first, he didn't say anything. He just poured himself a cup and sat down across from me. "So," he finally asked, "what does it feel like to win?" I gave it some thought. I said, "Like grief. Just cleaner." He nodded as if he understood what you were saying. After that, the calls slowed down. The emails didn't seem as important anymore. Patricia disappeared from the news cycle as quickly as she had tried to take over it. People stopped talking about her the next day, even though she was everywhere the day before. Richard sent one last message. A long one. Sorry piled on top of explanations, and explanations piled on top of regret. I read it once and then put it away. Not out of rage. Out of closure. Aunt Helen kept in touch. She came by a lot to help me go through decades of history that had built up. Old books of accounts. Jewelry that had been passed down from women whose names I was just learning. It felt like each thing was a quiet reclamation. She once said to me, "This was supposed to be yours," and then she gave me a pretty gold bracelet. Patricia didn't like that. That made me happy. After the legal issues were settled, reality set in. The estate needed to be managed. Choices. Duty. I hired advisors, property managers, and people who could speak in spreadsheets and forecasts. It was too much for me, but I had to deal with it. I kept my job for a while, at least. There was something appealing about normalcy. But even there, things changed. I was no longer hidden. I wasn't getting smaller to fit into expectations that weren't meant for me. One afternoon, the senior leadership asked me to come to a meeting. They said I could get a promotion. A real one. Not a comfort. Not a favor. One of them said, "Your ability to stay calm under pressure has been impressive." That made me laugh. Life settled into a pattern that I didn't know but slowly got used to. The house in the morning. Walking around the grounds at night, learning the shape of the land like it was a language I had forgotten and was finally remembering. And yet, under the calm, something was stirring. Now, the letters from my mother bothered me in a different way. Not with pain, but with questions that aren't answered. Who had she been before the pieces I had? What had her life been like before it ended? I began to dig. Records from the hospital. Addresses from the past. Archives of newspapers. I followed her movements like a map that went back in time. It became clearer and clearer that Eleanor's life hadn't ended peacefully as I learned more. There were holes. Months that are missing. An accident report that didn't make sense. One night, I casually brought it up with my lawyer. He frowned at the papers and said, "That's strange." Years later, these records were changed. Changed how? He said, "Cause of death. Originally listed as problems during childbirth. Changed later to heart failure." My stomach got tight. "Is that strange?" "It's not common," he said carefully. "Especially without any proof." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house had a different feel. Not a threat. "Be careful." I took out my mother's letters again and read them with fresh eyes. In one, there was a line that stood out at first but wasn't very noticeable. "If something happens to me, please don't think it was an accident." I couldn't breathe. I never thought it would happen. There was something wrong. The next few weeks were a quiet investigation. At first, I didn't tell Lucas. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Just that the story I had been told had holes in it. Aunt Helen knew more than she said. I could tell by the way her hands shook when I asked her certain questions. Helen said one afternoon, her eyes on the garden, she was scared. Not of giving birth. Of Patricia. That name still meant something. "Why?" I asked. Helen thought for a moment. "Because Eleanor wouldn't sign something." "What?" "An article," she said. "I never saw it." But Patricia wanted to be in charge of a trust that Grace had set up. Eleanor was next in line. Pregnant, single, and inconvenient. The air was colder. "You think, Patricia, I think," Helen said softly, "that Eleanor's death fixed a lot of things. The suggestion hung between us like ash." That night, I told Lucas everything. He listened, his jaw tight and his anger bubbling just below the surface. He said, "You need to be careful. Digging into this could wake up things that don't want to stay buried." "I know," I said. "But if I don't, she wins again." The official channels were slow. Unyielding. Old cases have a way of keeping themselves safe. But if you put enough pressure on the right spots, information will come out. A nurse who used to work there came forward. Then a worker. Then a retired doctor who remembered being told to sign and forget. It wasn't enough to get charges. Not yet. But it was enough to change the story. Eleanor didn't die of natural causes. She had been ignored. Put off. Left waiting when it was most important. Patricia had been there that night, too. When the truth began to come out, slowly and on purpose, the response was quiet but strong. No news. No show. Just results. Patricia's friends and family disappeared. The invitations stopped coming. Personal reasons made her boards ask her to step down. The world didn't make a big deal out of it. It took her away. Months later, one night, I was alone in the study again, looking at Grandma Grace's picture. "I see it now," I said quietly. Everything. I was no longer angry. I was more steady than that. Settled. Outside, the wind blew through the trees, carrying with it the sound of something coming to an end. And finally, something else is starting. That night, when I went to bed, I slept well. Not because the past was over. But I wasn't scared of it anymore. The day after the birthday party, the house felt different. The silence was no longer heavy or oppressive, it was quiet in a way that felt like breathing. I slowly walked through the Anderson estate, and each step echoed in the big halls. It was a reminder that the weight of 30 years had finally lifted. The chandeliers still sparkled in the morning light, but they no longer felt like symbols of judgment. Instead, they were witnesses to the truth and to my reclaiming of my identity. I touched the railing of the stairs I used to walk down as a child. I held my breath as Patricia's words played in my head, and then Grandma Grace's voice, always a whisper in my memory, told me I belonged. Aunt Helen got there sooner than I thought she would. She was already in the kitchen, with her hands folded on the island. She looked both relieved and proud. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said in a soft voice. Even when the world around us tried to convince me otherwise, her voice was warm like someone who had always been family. I smiled, which was the first real smile I had felt in years, and walked over to her. "You did everything right," she said, as if she could read my mind. "You stood your ground. You didn't give them the satisfaction." I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and relief. It wasn't about getting back at them anymore, it never had been. It was about getting back my life, my past, and finally my peace. We went to the parlor. The tall windows let in the morning light, which fell on the furniture that had been there for generations. This house wasn't just walls and wood, it was a memory, an inheritance, and proof that I had always belonged. I took a deep breath and let myself walk from room to room, letting the truth sink in. The garden where Grandma Grace and I used to sit was still there. I ran my hand along the worn stone path and thought about the summers the first spent listening to her stories and how she always made me feel seen. Lucas stood in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. He smiled at me in a soft, encouraging way that said, "I've been here the whole time." I took the cup and followed him to the balcony that looked out over the estate grounds. The city went on, but in this space, the world seemed to stop. His voice was low and steady when he said, "I wanted to make sure you're okay. After last night. I mean, everything." I laughed softly and shook my head. "I'm doing more than okay. I think I'm finally free. Free from everything I never wanted but had to carry. 30 years of feeling like I had to prove I belonged, it's gone." He nodded, and in that silence, he understood more than words could ever say. The phone rang out of the blue, ruining the moment. Aunt Helen was there. "Patricia," she said with a frown as she listened, "she wants to talk to you." My stomach turned. I didn't think she would reach out, not yet, not at all. I thought about ignoring it, but something inside me, an anxious, small curiosity, made me respond. "Yes." My voice was calm and steady, it didn't shake. "Hey Myra, I just want to talk. Please. Are we able to meet?" Patricia's voice sounded different, smaller, almost desperate, and without any pretense. For a moment, I thought about what I could do. I could say no and let the silence protect me. But I needed to hear her to find out if there was any hope for redemption. "Okay," I finally said. "Place that is neutral. Coffee. Tomorrow morning." The next day, Patricia came in looking defeated and almost unrecognizable. Her carefully planned facade had completely fallen apart. She sat across from me with her hands folded tightly in her lap and didn't look me in the eye. I don't know how to start," she said in a low voice. I said, "You can start with the truth." My voice was strong but not mean. "You made me feel like an outsider for 30 years. Why?" I saw her eyes fill with tears and her body shake in a way I had never seen before. I was jealous," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't get why Grandma Grace always looked at you like you were more important. I tried to control everything, even you, because I was afraid of losing my job, my image, my everything." She finally looked me in the eye, and I could see how vulnerable she was. "I was wrong. I can change it. I already know that." I slowly nodded. I was still angry, but it didn't take over my life. "I don't expect you to fix 30 years. I don't need you to forgive me. You need to understand your limits and change if you want to have a place in the future. Words aren't enough anymore. She nodded and swallowed hard. I get it. I'll do whatever it takes. I let her words hang in the air, not sure if they would ever mean enough, but at least they were a start. Later that day, I walked around the estate by myself and thought about things. The house didn't feel like a place of judgment anymore, it felt like a blank canvas where new memories could be made. I went to Grandma Grace's room, which she had set up for me. I lit a candle for her and one for Marcus, and the light flickered in the still room. I remembered the lessons she had taught me, to be brave, to tell the truth, and to know that you didn't get belonging from other people, you had to claim it, nurture it, and recognize it in yourself. I started to make changes over the next few weeks. Not out of spite or to forget the past, but to make a home that showed love and honesty. The Marcus Anderson Memorial Scholarship Fund was more than just a symbol, it became something real. Young artists like Myra, who didn't know what would happen next in their lives, now had chances to do well. Every child I met reminded me that legacy is about making a difference and making the world a better place for everyone, even those who had been ignored before. Lucas was still my rock. We didn't rush or label, but he was always there and made us feel better. Aunt Helen and Richard became my chosen family. They fought for me, stood up for me, and saw my worth long before I did. Patricia, too, started to reach out in small, careful ways over time. Not yet for reconciliation, but to learn how to be humble and responsible. I let her show me what she could do over time. The estate became a place to grow. Rooms that used to be tense and neglected became art galleries, libraries of knowledge, and quiet places to think. I made places that honored the people who really loved me, like Grandma Grace, Marcus, and Aunt Helen. Their memories were no longer kept secret, they were honored, lived, and shared. On a cold winter night, I sat by the fire in the parlor with a cup of tea in my hands. Outside, it was lightly snowing, covering the ground in a blanket of white. The house felt alive in a way it never had before. People had come over earlier for a small get-together with friends, some of the scholarship winners, and a few distant relatives who had always been nice. The sound of laughter and talking filled the air. I learned something important: belonging isn't about everyone loving you, it's about loving yourself and letting those who want to love you stay close. I thought about the trip, the shame, the discovery, the victory, and the peace. After 30 years of being treated like an outsider, the moment of truth changed everything. But the story didn't just end with a win. It ended with thinking about the past, growing, and realizing that life, with all its ups and downs, could still bring beauty and a sense of belonging. I took out my phone and wrote myself a note with a list of things to remember. First, I deserve love, starting with myself. 2. I don't need anyone's permission to fit in. 3. Boundaries are not mean, they are a way to protect yourself. 4. You can't just pass on your legacy, you have to do something to make it. 5. The people who choose to see and honor you are much more important than those who don't. I put the note in a small box next to Grandma Grace's picture as a reminder for myself and anyone else who might come after me. The estate was no longer just a house, it was a living proof of truth, strength, and the power of taking your place in the world. As the night came to an end, I looked around at the smiling faces of people who had chosen to be in my life because they wanted to, not because they had to. For the first time, I understood that home wasn't just one place or one family. Home was where truth was respected, love was given freely, and dignity was acknowledged. And at that moment, with the firelight dancing and laughter echoing through the halls, I whispered to myself, I belong. I always did. The Boston skyline sparkled outside, a reminder that the world was big and full of both problems and opportunities. The house was warm inside and full of stories of bravery, redemption, and legacy. I had received a gift that was better than any inheritance, property, or title, the truth. With it, I could finally be myself. The candles flickered one last time before the night fell into a calm silence. Myra Anderson, who used to feel like she didn't belong, was now firmly in her own life, her own power, and her own story. The estate, the scholarship, the relationships, and the truth were all parts of a tapestry that she had made for herself. It wasn't just the end, it was the beginning of a new life, a new family, and a legacy built on love and bravery. In the end, Myra's story didn't end with revenge, anger, or resentment. It ended with strength, clarity, and the unshakable belief that she was enough, always had been, and always would be. There were still unknowns in the world outside the estate, but she faced them with open eyes, steady hands, and a heart that was anchored in the knowledge that she had finally come home, to herself and to the truth that would guide her forward.